What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review. This is our weekly show where we review the Magic stories. And as we've been doing recently, these are not current stories, but they are stories inspired by the most recent set that has come out, which is Zendikar Rising. So we are reviewing the Battle for Zendikar / Oath of the Gatewatch stories. This week we are up to story number 5, Unkindness of Ravens by James Wyatt. My quick review at the top is, and we'll talk about this a little bit towards the end as well, this was a very short story. If you want information on Liliana, this story's for you. If you want information on the Chainveil, the Raven Man, this is it. This is the one that you should read. It's a quick read, so there's kind of no excuses if you're looking for information on Liliana in that regard. So my quick review is, if you need those things, go and read it. If you remember most of the things about Liliana, there wasn't anything in here where I was like, oh yeah, I'd forgotten about that. Like, all of this stuff was like, no, I remembered all of this. This is all pretty relevant information, but repetitive information that got repeated a lot over the last few years of stories and stuff. So if that's something that you have not been keeping up with, then this one may be the one for you. Okay. What do you think?
I learned 2 things from this story.
Okay.
That I didn't know.
Okay. So there you go. So then maybe if you feel like you're missing anything on Lily, then maybe it's worth reading. Is that what you're saying?
I didn't say that.
Fair enough. That's not what she said. Not to put words in anybody's mouth.
It's very short, which is fine. I had high expectations because it was written by James Wyatt. They were not fulfilled. But I don't care for the subject matter. So.
Okay, fair enough. So that's our quick...
Maybe that's why.
Those are our quick reviews up at the top. Please feel free. If you would like, check the description down below, and you will find a link to this story if you want to go read it for yourself. We're going to do a bit of summarizing as we review it, only because it's an older story. We're not going to sit here and be like, your homework is to go read the story. But if it's something that you want to be reminded of now based on the information that you've gotten, and you want to go back and kind of refresh yourself before joining in on any discussions with us, we encourage you to do that. And then obviously we would love it if you would come back here as well. But if not, we'll be doing our best to kind of say, and then this happened a bit, and we'll do our best. So, speaking of which, onto the full review itself. Kind of starts with a lot of like information on Liliana's past, as well as like a bit of a flashback to last week's story that we reviewed, which was where she comes to Jace, and she and Jace are reminiscing about their past together, as well as like she's hinting to him that she needs help, but she's only hinting it. And we know, because last week's story was told from Jace's perspective, that he was waiting for an actual request, as opposed to just, I'm hinting at it, you can figure it out, don't make me say it, because I don't want to. Jace is sitting there going, no, I'm going to make you say it. And then she never did, and then he got a better offer, so to speak, like a more important offer in his mind. And he went off with the person...
It was more important, but
right.
On top of it, he got an actual offer.
Right. He actually got asked, and so he went with the person who actually asked, as he flat out told her. So now we're hearing from her after the fact to hear how she feels about that. She feels still somehow betrayed, because as Amy will tell you, I'm sure, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, oh, woe is her. No one listens when she doesn't ask them for help, but still expects them to help her.
Yeah. And also just is super selfish instead of caring about the downfall of an entire plane, because, well, it's not my plane, I don't care about it.
Yeah, okay. She called it a backwoods plane being attacked by monsters. Mm-hmm. I will say, what was trying to be brought up in this story were the issues that Liliana has and why she's having them. So her issues are with this Chainveil, that she needs to use the Chainveil to kill her demons, but then she will be more beholden to the Chainveil, and or the Chainveil would kill her or take her over, so she needs help dealing with the Chainveil first. And she references the fact that Jace, at the end of the last story, she doesn't say at the end of the last story, but we all know that, basically said to her, well, hey, I'm going to go help this Gideon guy. Why don't you come with us? And she, for a moment in the story, like, again, she was mostly angry about that. But for a portion of the story, she kind of thought to herself, you know, maybe I could go. Fighting these monsters and then raising them from the dead to fight for me as my own army seems like a lot of fun. And then she kind of, again, realizes the fact that that would just put her right back in the same issue that she had, where the chain veil would be then controlling her. This one. So we find a bit of her plight in that regard, that she needs help with the chain veil, mostly so she can kill the demons, so she can, you know, get rid of her demonic pact. I couldn't think of the contract. But she knows that she would then just be beholden to the chain veil, because that's the only way that she was able to kill Gristlebrand and Kothafed. And the Raven Man tells her, whether the Raven Man is to be believed or not, weirdly, he is manipulating her. Mm-hmm. But anyway, whether he's to be believed or not, he says that the next two are more powerful than the previous two were. Spoilers, we've seen them. Razaketh and... oh, God.
Gristlebrand?
No, Gristlebrand is the second one. Belzenlock, that's the one. Razaketh and Belzenlock. Sorry if you were yelling that at me. I heard you eventually. But Razaketh and Belzenlock, he claims are more powerful than the first two. Who knows if that's correct or not. What matters, though, is that, you know, that's what she believes. She believes that she needs the chain veil to do it. And, you know, we know that she even mentions that she backstabbed Jace because she thought that Nicol Bolas would be able to help her more. So she went to Nicol Bolas for his help. Turns out he was manipulating her.
Turns out she deserves it. Because she tried doing it to Jace.
No, she succeeded at doing it to Jace multiple times until he finally stopped.
No, I mean in this one.
Oh, yeah.
Or last story.
Sure. Yeah, and she, sure enough, she reminisces about, like I said, their time together, and, you know, again, talks about stabbing him in the back and etc.
Oh, I miss him doing my bidding. It's so sad.
Basically. But, so, in her angry walking through Ravnica, right, she's, like, brooding and upset and annoyed with Gideon and saying, like, you know, oh, they asked me to help, like that would ever happen. And then again, thinking, but maybe it could, and like I said.
They didn't ask you to help. Jace was like, oh, you're here, right. Do you want to come? And then she's saying, they asked me for help, but I'm way too snobby for it. No. You're just useless. So, they didn't ask you for help. You didn't ask Jace for help. Gideon asked Jace for help, so Jace helped him. And you're just here.
And being in her own head like that, she kind of aimlessly walks and ends up in an empty courtyard. Kind of referencing the fact that there's like a random raven here and a random raven there. You know, here a raven, there a raven, everywhere a raven. And she ends up in this empty courtyard where she sees a ton of ravens. Buildings around her, fountain in front of her, just a ton of them. Calls out knowing that the Raven Man is there. He shows up out of a cloud of ravens and he starts manipulating her. It's
kind of old.
But I will say one thing. At one point she is talking to the Raven Man, kind of angrily. Surprise, surprise. And she says something, right? And as she's saying it, this is a quote that I wrote down because Amy wanted me to, not that I think it's a very good quote to have written down. The Onaki spirits echoed them, the words, in her mind with hissing whispers that resounded like the inside of a mausoleum. And what did you say? I thought it was very pertinent what you said.
I loved that line because nobody hears whispers in a mausoleum but her, because she's a necromancer. So I loved that line that, like, to kind of create a simile that is so abnormal because they're describing one thing by using an example of another thing, and neither of those things are things that you would understand as a human reading the story.
Yeah.
It's so flavorful. It's so fun.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
It was cool.
Yeah, it was very cool. I mean, again, this is a short one. We've got like a couple more things to talk about, but not a lot because it's a short story.
Yeah, it's a very short story. The one thing I really liked about it. That line and that it was short.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And then, sure enough, that conversation that they're having, a lot of doublespeak by the Raven Man, again, more manipulations, etc. He even mentions at one point, you know, she brings something up and it reminds her of Jace. And she's thinking about that. And as she's thinking about that, the Raven Man mentions Jace. You know, he's like, even your precious Jace wanted you to do this, but whatever. You know, and again, more manipulation, more attempting to sway her and make her feel useless and hopeless and etc. And
yeah, he was like, even he won't help you.
Yeah. And look, I remember that, like, that much of this story I remember because I remember thinking to myself, you know, as the question has been presented many times, I thought to myself, who is this guy? How is he able? Because Liliana brings this up in the story. She says, you're obviously a planeswalker because I saw you on Chandelar/Dominaria. Which can or could not be true. It could be that part of him is in the Chain Veil and he was only there. And I have not read the earlier stories enough to know if it's like, no, Joe, he was talking to her before she was in the, like, before she even had the Chain Veil. If that's the case, let me know in the comments. That's a pretty easy fix of like, no, that part is incorrect. But he could be a planeswalker, but he could also just be in your mind. In fact, he could just be a construct of her mind. And we haven't really heard from the Raven Man much in present day in 2020, you know, up to this point. Maybe we'll see him again, hopefully. Maybe we won't. Who the hell knows? Maybe that's one of the threads that got thrown out the window with one of the umpteen changes to the story team. Maybe it's a thread they'll pull on later when they need it.
But yeah, you mentioned that she saw him on Chandelar. She mentioned being on Chandelar and that the voices of the Onaki from the Chain Veil were louder on Chandelar because that's where they were from.
Correct. That's their home plane.
That's one of the things that I learned from this story.
Oh, okay. Okay.
The other one was... What was the other one? Was that they had lived together, her and Jace.
Right. Yeah, because I had remembered it at minimum from like the Ixalan stories of them kind of sharing a bed and spending the nights together, but as you correctly pointed out,
not the same as living together.
Good point. Yeah,
and they specified that they lived together in a shitty apartment, basically, on Ravnica.
Correct. Yeah.
I didn't know any of that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, again, we read these stories, but it was a very long time ago. So it's nice that, you know, we're doing this for us and for you, really. But, you know, getting to go back and remind ourselves of all these things that, you know, we're like, oh, that makes so much more sense now. Because we did. We read these back in the day. I remember reading the story.
That doesn't make any sense, because then we would have known that they were exes instead of just thinking it.
I don't remember. Like I said.
It doesn't make any sense that we've read these already.
Okay. I know we have, but maybe that part wasn't as resonant with us. I don't know. But yes, so feel free to let us know in the comments what you think, if you remembered all those things and you're like, yeah, obviously, or, you know, what have you. Because for those of you that may have been around since the beginning, what Amy's referencing is when we did the Shadows over Innistrad stories, we talked about this last week as well, we made a big deal out of the fact that, like, because the two of them, Jace and Liliana, had such a confrontational meeting in that story, we were like, surprised, and Amy just kept saying over and over again, they're clearly exes. They're obviously exes, and these stories flat out tell you that. You don't have to infer it. So yeah, like I said, I don't remember. I could swear that we read them previously, but like you said, I agree that it would make sense that then we would not have made as big of a deal out of them. Us figuring out that they were exes or taking guesses the whole time or whatever.
Yeah, so we might have read some of these stories and like the last few or whatever, but we definitely didn't read this one, and we definitely didn't read the one before that.
Okay. Later on in this one, Liliana, again, through the conversation, he's making her angrier. That's kind of how this is ramping up. And she just turns around, he holds a dagger up to her back at one point, and she says she's not afraid of him. He pushes her back, or she pushes him back with some darkness magic or whatever. And then later on, she turns around and gets really angry and blasts him with energy, and he disperses into a bunch of ravens that fly away and dead ravens that fall to the ground. And then she hears wings behind her, turns around, and he's appearing out of another cloud of ravens, and she grabs his wrist and blasts him with more energy, sucks life out of him, or at least attempts to, and he collapses into more dead birds and more ravens and more ravens flying away. And then she even mentions at one point, which I found kind of interesting, that she raises a bunch of ravens from the dead at that point. All these dead ravens around her, she brings them back to fight for her. And then when a swirl of ravens begins to form, where the Raven Man had been walking out of in the past, she sent her ravens at those to peck at them and bite at them, at the flesh and etc. Which I thought was a cool image, by the way. But she also says that she swore that she could see the Raven Man walking out, but then putting his hands up to cover his face and then dispersing back into the crowd again, which would indicate that he is more than just possibly indicate that he is more than just a construct in her mind. But because she's in a big empty place, it's possible that this is all mental for her.
Well, and she touched him. That makes it different too.
It kind of.
Because it's one thing if somebody else is there and sees her touch him, but you can imagine something and just see it, but it's different to touch it and feel it.
Kind of. Again, I agree with you. I was thinking of that as well. I mean, I'm curious how much of that could be mental manipulation and how much of that there is an actual person as well associated with it. Because I think it could be fully mental. And I think, again, if I'm the Magic story writers today and I'm reading this story, I could see it go both ways. If I'm looking for ways to bring this story back and there isn't a clear through line of years ago they said what we're going for, what we're aiming for with this is that he is this. That if they're looking for a way to revive that in the future, but they don't have a storyline for it yet, reading this story, I could see either argument holding water.
Okay.
If you're attempting to rewrite these stories or continue this thread later, I should say.
I will say, there are a lot of animes and stuff, and maybe D&D things, too, that I'm just unaware of demons sort of, possessing, people vessels,
mm-hmm.
Where they're, a puppet,
mm-hmm.
but they're controlling the puppet from a distance, So it could be something like that, too, where, she can touch his body and feel a body, but it's because there's this body that he uses as his puppet, even though his essence is far away.
Okay, and we've seen something similar, but not exactly the same. We've seen something similar with Bolus in the future compared to this story, but in the past compared to today, while we're sitting here recording this. Remember where Bolus, it was in the Corset story, I think, where he appeared as random villagers.
Well,
and was talking to Ugin
but that's
or whatever.
Just changing your appearance.
But it wasn't him. He was projecting himself. He wasn't there.
Oh, okay.
Because he didn't like he can't shapeshift to my knowledge. So he didn't like shapeshift into a human and then go walking up and talking to somebody, right? He like or was it on Dominaria
he just,
that I'm
puts
thinking?
his voice in things.
Well,
like,
but it's their body. Like he's still speaking through them. It's not like they're it's not like a disembodied voice. It's the body looking at Liliana or Gideon or whatever, moving their mouth and talking, but they know it's Nicol Bolas based on what is being said.
I guess that's similar.
It's similar. It's definitely not exactly the same.
I was thinking like being able to move all of its limbs and like do a whole thing, as opposed to just like, controlling what they say.
Okay. I mean, it's not just about what they walk up to the planeswalker and talk to them, but they don't. It's not just like they walk up to somebody and Bolas like makes their eyes open, talk out of them, and then they go like this and go about their day. Yeah. But yes, I mean, again, I don't think it's exactly the same, but I think it's similar enough.
Okay.
And that's kind of it. Like they talk and then
a lot to this story.
She just bails. And what I'll say, looking like taking a step out of the story, so not talking about the words as much. There were a ton of pictures in this story as well.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing. Never a complaint from me. The more art, the better. Again, the art combined with the stories and the characters is a great way to tell these stories. It's super important. It's a visual and text medium. It's relevant for storytelling purposes. That's how it should be done, since your cards are the same way. People have talked about, if you don't think that Magic story is relevant, right, or that flavor is important in Magic cards, then you would be perfectly okay with a Magic card with a pure white face not a face, but a white section in the box where the art would be, and you would just have the card name, the mana cost, the rules text, the power and toughness, etc., but nothing in that box up top. Would you really be okay with that? Because they've shown those pictures online, and it's like, no. Because when you look at a Magic card, at least when I look at a Magic card, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth. When I look at a Magic card, I don't read the rules text to know what the card is. I look at the art, and I go, oh, that's such and such a card. Because you know the art. The art is familiar to you, right? Or that's that particular art for that card, that particular version of it, right? Oh, that's the 8th edition art, I remember specifically, right? That's white bordered, I guess. The different border or whatever.
Weird savantness. That's not... But
that's not just me.
I identify them by the art as well. I mean, I don't remember names of cards necessarily, and I don't remember their abilities worth a frickin' damn. And if I ever did, maybe I'd actually be able to play Magic. But, I remember the arts, and so, and I give things nicknames too,
Oh, yeah.
and stuff, so I remember them better, Oh yeah, that card was good. I remember you saying that card was good because it did this one thing, right? Oh, maybe it didn't do that one thing. I don't remember. But I remember that card was good because I remember seeing that art.
Right. And you mentioned that, I think, most recently on our stream this past Monday. Shameless plug. Mondays, 8 to 10 p.m. right here, MTG Arena. But anyway, you mentioned that on our stream where you were like, oh, I don't remember what that card does. I just know that you think it's good because I remember, because of the art. Which, look, however you do it, that's totally fine. If you have different ways, if you're like, if you don't think I'm a savant, if you're that way as well, leave it in the comments. Because I know that there are Magic players who are absolutely... there are people who will look at a card, and I guess this is more ability-based. A skill that I do not have is when people will look at a card and it'll be like, I don't know, like a Sylvan Caryatid type of a card, right? And people will look at that and be like, oh, it's like a new Vine Trellis. Feel free to go look up both of those cards. But I'm not very good at that. I'm not very good at being like, oh, it's like a Grey Ogre, but not. You know what I mean? Like I'm not very good at comparing it to what it is slightly better than, what it's a functional reprint of or whatever. I can't just name that stuff for you off the top of my head. That I can't do. I'm usually pretty good though at cards that I'm intimately aware of. There was a situation in college where I let a friend borrow a deck because he didn't have one of his own. We were just playing for fun. And I let him borrow a deck, and he's looking at cards in his hand, and I can't see what he's looking at. And he's like, oh man, this would be good. He's like, but it's only got 4 toughness. And, your creature has a lot more power. And I'm like, oh, I know what card you have. He's like, no, you don't. All I said was it had 4 toughness. And
and that it would be good.
And there were other cards in his deck that had 4 toughness, but yeah, I was able to call it out. I was like, oh, it's this mana cost, and it's got this power, and
Right.
And he was very surprised.
He told you what sort of ability it had without telling you what sort of ability it had.
Basically.
Because he said, it would be good against this one thing that you've created on the board here.
Anyway, so it was a nice number of pictures. I really appreciated that, especially with a shorter story. It
was too many pictures for me.
Okay.
See, I have to do my makeup while he reads the story, and there were so many pictures. I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll see them, maybe I won't. I don't know. I'm doing my makeup over here. He's reading the story. And the story's so freaking short. It's like I had to look at pictures more than I had to actually listen to the damn story.
Well, see, and I was going to say, or what I mentioned to Amy at the end, because Amy, rightfully so, was like, wait, the story's over? It was very short.
I was like, what the hell?
But I would argue, back then, that made sense. I mean, think about today, let me see if I can see the calendar from here. November 11th, 2020, when I'm filming this. When was the last time a written Magic story appeared on their website? It's been a while. Right? I mean, Zendikar Rising, the last Zendikar Rising story, is the last story that we got. It was weeks ago, months ago at this point. Because of quarantine and what 2020 has been, it's been decades since the last Magic story came out. But anyway, I digress. When this story came out, they'd been releasing stories every week for weeks. And they were going to be releasing stories for weeks after. Like I said, this is story number 5 of 31 in just this block alone in Battle for Zendikar and Oath of the Gatewatch. So even if you split it up, if it's 15 each, this story is only 1/3 of the way-ish through Battle for Zendikar. And that's an estimation, not a guarantee. But it's only a third through Battle for Zendikar. And then you have all of Oath of the Gatewatch as well. It's like having a random short story in there is fine.
Yeah.
Totally fine. It's just that when we are starved for stories, we would think to ourselves, how dare you put up such a short story when you're not putting up stories? Like, how could you not just spend the time and write them? And again, I don't...
Because they were at that point.
Right.
Putting up stories every week.
Right. And I don't feel that way about James Wyatt here. I mean, if I look here, the last time he wrote a story was what, 3 weeks prior? 2 weeks prior? Hold on. Kelly Diggs was the one prior, then Ari, then James. Yeah. James Wyatt was story number 2. This is story number 5. So, it's just because there are so few, or so many, there were so many back then, it could be short. But because there's so few now, you'd have a lot of annoyed people. I don't want to say necessarily pissed off or anything like that. But people would be annoyed because it's like, you give us 5 stories per set, right? With Zendikar Rising, it was 5 main stories and 4 side stories or something. Right. If out of those 9 stories, like 2 of them were shorter ones, it would be like, okay.
It'd be like, crap.
Props to the author for getting paid. Hopefully they got paid the same amount for each one.
Yeah.
But it's like, that would be frustrating to me personally. Maybe it wouldn't be to you.
But because there's 9 instead of 30. Yeah.
Yeah. Because, and again, there's a lot to unpack from that. And I don't necessarily know that I'm comfortable going into it right now because I don't know that I have fully fleshed out my thoughts, and I don't want to flounder on it because that's not fair.
It's a can of worms that we just don't need for this episode.
Right, but it's also not necessary, right? I thought that the length of this story was perfectly acceptable. You seem, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you were not as okay with it.
Yeah, it was a very short story. There were too many pictures. It was very basic and bland for James Wyatt. I know he's capable of a lot more. But again, I'll go back to the same point I made a couple of weeks ago, where I said I don't think that we've gotten to that golden age of the story team yet. I don't think each of them have come into their own in terms of finding their perfect niche of storytelling, and then also being allowed to fully go there by the company.
Well, I find it interesting, right? It's a bit of saltiness on my end, so I won't go too far into it. But I see a lot of much more prominent figures in the Vorthos community, content creator community, and they get asked these questions that we've been giving the same answer to for months or years.
Yeah.
And they're being asked. And the people who are asking those questions, perfectly valid. But they're giving answers that we've been giving for such a long time.
Yeah.
But there was a question that was asked recently by somebody who I'm not going to recall their name, but I saw it on Twitter, where they said, what do people think was the golden age, the best time for Magic storytelling? So, Amy, I don't think I told you about that question, did I?
No.
So what's the answer?
For me, what's the answer?
Sure.
Or what's the answer that most people would give?
Yes, and. Keep going.
So for me, the answer is Ixalan.
That's the answer. That's the answer. I mean, what people said was like the end of Ixalan, just because like with where they were with what Ixalan and Rivals of Ixalan did, or at least the end of Ixalan into Rivals of Ixalan did, with how prominent and amazing that story was, and the future, the possibilities that were opened up in people's minds for like what was possible now because of this, that was the best time. And I fully agree.
I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
I'm just surprised because I really thought people would say it'd be prior to that. Because Ixalan, you wound up with quite a few of the original people from the story team not even there anymore.
Right, but don't forget, you still had Allison Lors, Kelly Diggs, and the rest of their team, because there were other members of that team, and they picked up the story that they had all workshopped together, all the folks that had already left and or been let go.
Right.
And they picked up that ball and ran so far with it, to the point where every week the byline was Allison Lors, and again, she did an amazing job. So I have never...
And I love Allison Lors, and I love what she did with the story. Absolutely. I mean, to a degree that I can't even describe. But I'm surprised that most other people feel the exact same way I do, because, I mean, if Allison's the main person writing the stories, is it really the golden age of the story team? You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's not what they asked. They asked what the golden age of the story was. Not the story team, the story.
Okay.
So what I was going to say before is, with Allison and Kelly being the two main figures, but Allison getting the byline on all these stories, you have the follow-up of the fact that eventually it just became the narrative, the Magic story team or whatever, was the byline after that. Because the team was the same 5 people or whatever. And my opinion, I have no inside information, and I could be talking out my ass. This is truly my thought. Allison Lors had a byline for however many weeks in a row that it was by her, and one of two things in my mind are what happened, and I could be wrong on both. Either they felt bad that like Allison was getting all the credit when it was a team effort working on these stories, and that maybe she polished up the language, right, and did the actual write-up, but they sat in meetings and like brainstormed and wrote down the bullet points together, and then Allison was the one who like put those bullet points together and actually, put more flavor and nuance into them in that way. Or it could be that she was writing each and every one of these stories and they didn't want that to be super obvious.
Yeah. I think what happened was, yes, she was putting more work in than everyone else on the team, although she was depending on the team to help her out with it. But I think what happened was people started going, is Allison the only person writing stories anymore? Mm-hmm. What's going on here? She's gonna get burned out. I hope you're paying her enough for this. What's going on?
And again...
And I think they just wanted to scoot back a little bit and say, no, everything's fine. We promise.
That's more the second one.
When everything wasn't fine.
Right. And again, appropriate shout-outs and love to Allison Lors, because
I love her so much.
I'm looking forward to, hopefully, a day where we get to go to a convention, first of all, or a Magic Fest or something to that effect, and be able to see her there as well. That would be really awesome. Just to like sit and talk to her for however long she has time, which I assume is not very, but we would love that. Regardless, that's a pipe dream and a half, especially here in 2020, here in the year of our Lord 2020. But yeah, so that's it for this one. We'll be back next week for story number 6, and see if we can continue getting into this one. I'm interested in getting more of like the action. I remember the action from these and like the fighting and the planning and the funny. We haven't had a lot of comedic in these, and I'm looking forward to those. Right, I'm looking forward to those memories coming back to me. So
yeah, that's why I say I think we started later than this story. I think we started, you know, a little further down the chain here, because I remember the action as well. I remember the funny quips, the like one-liners back and forth. And
that's more when you get, like, from my recollection at least, that's more when you get like the denizens of Ravnica, or not Ravnica, I always do that. The denizens of Zendikar meeting up with the Planeswalkers and gathering at that summit to try to figure out how they're going to fight the Eldrazi, and you get like Tazri and how much she hates Gideon, and you get Munda in there, and you get Kiora talking with all of them, and like how all those personalities gel. That is the stuff I live for. I'm super, super looking forward to that. So I'm looking forward to getting into these over the next few weeks. This one was, again, no...
Fine.
Right. Well, no negative commentary towards James Wyatt, because, again, it has nothing to do with the style of writing. It's just the content wasn't, you know, it was partial. But I think, again, it's because we remember a lot of it, right? This is not a lot of it was new information. You were able to pick 2 little, you know, gems out of there that to remind yourself or to learn those things. And, you know, that was kind of about it. Everything else was like, yep, we knew that. Yep, Raven Man. Yep. Onaki Spirits. Yep. You know, like, yes, you're 4 demons. We get it. But anyway, so hopefully we'll be back next week into more action. We'll definitely be back next week regardless. But
well, yeah.
Tune in for that. The best way to find out exactly when that video comes out for all of you would be to subscribe and then ring that bell so that for more of that. Subscribe and then ring that bell so that you find out exactly when all of our videos come out. You'll get notifications. You'll get notifications when we go live. You can do the same to our other channels. You can check our links in the description for that, along with the link to this story, as we said. There's links to our other channels, as well as to our socials, and you should check us out on those as well. And
yes, please do.
Yes, and so on those other channels, you can subscribe and ring those bells as well. Don't forget to like, share, all that stuff. Truly does help us out a lot. We really do appreciate it. Again, we're live every Monday from 8 to 10 p.m. every Friday as well. But Mondays are MTG Arena specific, so if you're only into Magic, that's fine. If you want to see other video game content from us as well, 8 to 10 p.m. on Fridays. This Friday, as we did last Friday and the second half of the week before, we are going to be continuing to play through Katamari Damacy Reroll.
Yeah, but again, if you ring that bell, you will get notified as to when this stuff is happening.
Right. And or if you follow us on socials, we post on our Twitter and our Facebook every time we go live, so you can stay tuned for that as well. But that is going to be the end of this particular episode. I do want to remind you all that when we talk about these older stories, when we join all of you in doing so, when you join us in doing so in the comments, when we take these stories and extrapolate them into talking about current stuff going on in 2020 on the Magic Story, and we relate back to Ixalan and etc. All of that is a cumulative way of all of you joining with us in showing off our
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
One day, I'm just gonna like keep going with like the length of the build-up for you saying that, so that it's just a whole video at this point. Like at the end, it'll just be because it's our, and it's just been I've been talking for like 40 minutes. Yeah, it's like Amy, do the thing.
What?
Do the thing. Oh God. God.
What did I do?
I dropped your hand so hard. I'm sorry. Are you
Oh, no,
okay?
it's
Okay. I thought you would catch yourself.
No, I very much on purpose let it fall.
She commit to the bit, folks. I love it. So, that, like I said,
always commit.
always. That is going to be the end of this particular episode. Thank you all so very much for watching. Again, all that fun YouTube stuff, super helpful. We appreciate it. But
As long as I get the bit.
exactly,
I commit to it.
exactly. And that's a whole other story for a whole other time. We'll see you live if you want to hear about that. Ask us. But for now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.